Hey there, Rebels, and thanks for stopping by again for another Star Wars Destiny video. Today's topic is going to be the impact of Empire at War. You know, a new set drops, and with that comes change. Change to decks, change in the meta, and changes to the way we look at some cards that were already in existence. And that last one is what I'm going to focus on today. So we're going to take a look back at some older cards that have been affected in some way by the new set dropping. In most cases, we're going to talk about cards that are made more playable by this set. And in a couple of cases, we're going to talk about cards that are perhaps less powerful due to the presence of all these new cards. We're just going to talk about 7 cards, so hopefully this won't take too long. So let's get started after this. Now, I don't think strategic planning has suddenly become some kind of game changer or anything like that, but I think that taking another look at this card is worthwhile for the simple reason that it is flexible. Strategic planning may be considered a bit more valuable than it was in the past simply because it interacts with supports. If the Empire of War meta shakes out in such a way that supports do in fact become a significant part of the dominant decks, then strategic planning may very well see some kind of play. So, what is the potential here? Well, on one hand, it's almost a removal card. You can exhaust an opponent's support so that it can't roll into the pool. Imagine locking out a U-Wing or Millennium Falcon before it actually gets to roll out. That doesn't sound too bad, actually. And on the other hand, it also allows you to ready a support. That means rolling out a vehicle twice in a turn just for one resource, and that's not bad either. People are already looking at a card like Reckless Reentry as a viable card, right? So why not this one? I think it might be that it kind of lengthens your turn a bit more than one might like. Think about it, right? Playing this card to ready the vehicle is one action, then activating the vehicle is another action, then finally resolving the die is a third action. But I mean, come on. If you're already playing a vehicle deck, then your turns are going to be slow as molasses anyway, right? What may shove this card out of decks are cards with somewhat higher impact. But even if this card is just on the outside looking in, I think it will get consideration if vehicles really do start to become a thing because of the options that you have with this card. Quad Jumper was getting talked up as soon as Hera Syndulla had been spoiled, and that makes a lot of sense, I think. Quad Jumper has an okay die, and it becomes a conduit for bigger and better things, but there weren't a lot of ways to take advantage of that in the Spirit of Rebellion meta. There was a very cool Unkar and double TIE pilot deck that performed quite well, and did in fact take advantage of Quad Jumper to an extent, but it kind of flew into the radar once Funkar and Rainbow Nines became the more dominant of the villain decks. But with the release of Empire at War, Quad Jumper finally has its day in the sun. The set is pushing us to try vehicle and support decks, and Quad Jumper is making that a bit more plausible by allowing us to bank some resources on the table and exchange itself for a better vehicle later on in the game. So the potential is very much there, and if you're going to build one of those vehicle decks, then Quad Jumper is pretty much a shoo-in. I think what keeps this one out of talks in the long run, however, is if vehicle decks end up not being a thing. Empire at War has now been out for about a week and a half, so I don't want to jump to conclusions, but the decks that we have seen produce so far, at least on the competitive side of things, hasn't really been vehicle focused. And I said something a while back on the Knights of Ren Discord, and it was that I would give a big hearty laugh if this whole Empire at War and vehicle thing really didn't encourage us to play supports, and it's kind of looking like I should start preparing to have that laugh. But I don't want to jump to any early conclusions, right? I think the problem lies in the fact that the game was going 100 miles an hour with Spirit of Rebellion, and FFG is trying to slow it down to 50 miles an hour, and it's just kind of not taking. In any case, keep an eye on Quad Jumper because if things do slow down, you'll want to have 2 copies of this card ready to go. A few months back, this was the daily card of discussion on Reddit. And in that discussion, I said that our only hope was a card that was basically waiting to be good. Well, Now is as good a time as any with a new set dropping, and the reason I bring it up in this video is that the potential for this card in vehicle decks, and I promise that this is the last card we're going to talk about in the context of vehicles, I swear, is very good. For 2 resources, you can potentially top deck a vehicle out into play, and then, if whatever you flip over isn't really worth your 2 resources, you just forget that any of that ever happened and get your money back. It's not a bad card now. In fact, it's never been a bad card. It's just been too far removed from all the really good cards that you saw in decks over the past few months. Our only hope in the context of Empire at War can now double your output with some luck. In a vehicle deck, you might be running 10 or 12 vehicles, let's say, and so you're looking about a 1 in 3 shot, or even better because of cards in your hand and cards in a table, of flipping a vehicle off the top of your deck and putting it directly into play for just 2 resources. That's pretty cool. And it's hard to argue that if that happened at any time in the game that it wouldn't be a good play, right? That's always awesome, and now I think it has some time to shine. In fact, I've already seen this card on several deck lists for the Maz Hera and Rookie Pilot deck, including my own. And it's only worked a couple times for me, but that's pretty much all it took to convince me that for now it will make the cut in a deck list. So don't underestimate this bargain bin card from the last set. Its day is either here or it's on the horizon. Never Tell Me the Odds is another Spirit of Rebellion card that has always been good. It's also been just out of reach at 3 cost and a good hero to pair it with. At first, people tried this one out in Jin and Han solo decks, as you would imagine, and it saw some success there. But those decks never really became super popular in the Spirit of Rebellion meta. Henrei was, and is still good, but there were just better cards to create the tempo that made that deck good. And this one just didn't quite make the cut because it's a very tight deck list. Jin, if you're paying attention, went the way of the dodo because, well, she was overcosted and she had no good partner to create a 4-dice start with. Now, with Ezra making money and Sabine saving money periodically, Never Tell Me the Odds is having its comeuppance, I think. People are starting to see this card as worthwhile, especially when paired with Infamous and all the ambush tricks you can pull off in that mono yellow hero deck. Sabine already has a lot of explosive plays too, and Never Tell Me the Odds is now pushing the envelope on what is good and what is a blowout. Think of it as a very expensive version of It's a Trap for yellow. You know that card is good. And this one is even better since it doesn't rely on an opponent's die to be showing the symbol that you want. But it also costs 3 times as much for that reason. Never Tell Me the Odds is in fact a blowout card, and it's going to see more play now because a new pairing has enabled it. You'll probably see this as like a one-of in a lot of decks, and it will end or decide games very swiftly. So watch out for this one. Planned Explosion is a card that has been waiting for a solid round 1 to come along and happen, and now that is totally plausible. Just imagine Elite Lando, Alien Mon Mothma, and 2 Chance Cubes. Planned Explosion now has the potential to actually work with a bit more consistency than in the past. It's a card that people have been looking to fit into decks for months now. And now, with all the new hero and neutral cards that have 3 sides on them, Planned Explosion is finally having its moment. The other great thing about Planned Explosion now is it has a great chance to function off non-damage dice. Die with damage on them are generally the most removed in the game of Destiny, and so the choice with Planned Explosion was a bit silly if you were already showing 10 combined damage on your dice. Planned Explosion would only be really useful if you couldn't resolve like pace sides on those dice that were showing damage. Now, you can craft Planned Explosion into a card that runs off resource and disrupt sides, which are some of the least removed sides in Destiny, especially against hero. We also haven't had a lot of those up until now, but now that we do, that's enabling this card to really shine. So what I'm saying right here and right now is that Planned Explosion is a potentially good card if you can set it up. Lando Mon Mothma and Sabine Ezra mentioned earlier can actually pull it off naturally with just character dice. The odds are incredibly low of that happening, but it is possible. Take a look at all the character pairings and sets now that will help you set up a great deck, but and I think in doing that, we're going to find that it's really not that far off of becoming a potentially viable deck type. The Vibratory Knife, probably the single most hated card in Star Wars Destiny. And I can say that because people argue that it causes an entire mechanic to completely malfunction in this game, and that mechanic, of course, is shields. But what I'm actually going to tell you right now is that I think the time of the Vibro Knife has passed. So let's think back for a moment to the decks that Vibro Knife actually saw play in, right? Common ones included Blue Hero melee decks, Blue Villain melee decks, Rainbow Nines, which was really more for the ambush than the actual card effect. And that's mostly it. I mean, yellow was more range focused, and red has always been more range focused. So what Empire at War has gifted us with is a whole bunch of new lightsabers, and a lot of these new lightsabers are 2-cost. So now I feel like Vibro Knife's die is being called into question a bit more. When we make a deck, we have to consider resource curves, and what I feel right now is that Vibro Knife is actually getting pushed out of the 2-cost resource slots because it's not as impactful as it once was in comparison to the new stuff we got. When you take a look at things like Ancient Lightsaber and Shoto Lightsaber and even Crossguard Lightsaber, you start to ask yourself if this card that slips all your damage under shields and not much else is actually worth it anymore. And it's not that the effect still isn't good, it's just that other weapons have an effect that is becoming a better choice for our limited deck slots. And this is what happens when you add another 160 cards into a card pool and you don't increase the deck size, right? Cards compete. And I think for Vibro Knife, it's becoming a losing battle. I also want to take a moment to mention that I think this was actually done on purpose. I really do feel that Fantasy Flight Games understood the absolute overpowered nature of this card and what it enabled you to do and what it disabled about things like Blue Hero. It destroyed them. It made them completely unviable in competition for the most part. It also pushed Han-Rei out in a big way too, although that deck found a different set of legs to stand on other than just aggro. So what I'm trying to say here is that, you know what, hats off to FFG, because I think you might have actually fixed Vibro Knife without actually fixing Vibro Knife. Fast Hands is the last card we're going to talk about today, and I was a bit hesitant to talk about it in this video, but I'm mentioning it for the same reasons I mentioned Vibro Knife, and that is that I think it's getting pushed out. Not strictly, of course, for the same reasons, however, and I want to clarify what I mean by that. So in the case of Vibro Knife, I said it gets the cut because of better options in the same category, right? That 2 resource cost category. Lightsabers are coming in, knives are coming out. For Fast Hands, I don't think it's getting replaced by another card that does something better than Fast Hands. I think the reason that Fast Hands doesn't make the cut as much anymore is that we're seeing a shift in the way that the game is actually being played and approached. So let's talk context, right? In a world where you resolve 4 or 5 dice in a turn, Fast Hands lets you ensure that one of those die gets resolved with absolute certainty. Now, in a world where you're activating characters for big effects or rolling a lot of die into the pool in the form of supports and upgrades and overwhelming your opponent with removal choices, Fast Hands is still good, but it's not the beacon of hope that it once was. For these reasons, I feel like Fast Hands gets replaced with some other stuff that has greater synergy with the deck that you're trying to build. Now, it's still going to see play with certain characters like Jabba or Aura Singh or Django, because those characters have dice that are either way too valuable to your win con to be removed, or because Fast Hands allows you to speed up your turn and focus on some other things. In Jabba's case, that die would be the 2 discard side. In Aura's case, it's any of her 2 range damage sides. In Django's case, it might be his melee side because he has to mix damage and you don't want to use an extra turn to resolve that. In any case, it's also yellow character only right now. So that errata's impact is, I think, being felt in this very instance. I mean, just imagine what Hera could have been with Fast Hands, or K2SO, or Mace Windu. That would be pretty blowout stuff. So yeah, I think that the boat has sailed on Fast Hands, and maybe the game is better for that. Well, we're done. And I know that I've been focusing a bit more on Empire at War lately, but hey, that's all the rave right now, right? So I would expect probably another video related to Empire at War pretty soon. Or I was thinking I might even go back to reviewing some of the commons in Spirit of Rebellion, which is how I got started with this channel in the first place. But in any case, expect something next week, and I'm going to try to come up with a set schedule, maybe like Tuesdays and Fridays, so that things make a bit more sense for the viewers. And occasionally, I'm even going to pepper in one of those personal thoughts videos just to keep things kind of fresh. So, all right, folks, I hope you've enjoyed this one, and I guess I'll see you in a couple days for some more discussion on this great game we all love. And in the meantime, if you like what you're listening to, please subscribe to me here on YouTube. Follow me on the Bookface or Twitter or whatever else you're into, and tell your friends about me too. So until next time, may the Force be with you.